The new Dune movie will be bringing a lot of new eyes to the book series that it'll be adapting from way back in the day. And going into the bookstore without someone holding your hand can be overwhelming. Sounds like I'm exaggerating, I know, but there are 43 plus different books and short stories written here, and that's not including the comics and graphic novels that adapt these books and short stories. There's even more being pumped out as we speak. The catalog has been expanding since the first novel, Dune, written by Frank Hebert in 1965. But these 6 books are what I think most can only pay attention to. The experienced writer wrote the first book with a whole universe created behind it, with parts of material completed for sequels. Any science fiction nerd recognizes the name Dune, and has probably been recommended to check out the series over and over. But the success of the first novel was not overnight, it was very gradual. Frank Hebert wasn't the most recognized or accomplished author prior. He had tons of experience in newspaper journalism, book reviewing and photography, and even dabbled in some ecology, which you can definitely pick up on through the themes of Dune. But this book was only his second ever novel at age 45, and he was far from being a wealthy man. But after experimenting with new novels, he went back to the Dune story as its success was picking up some steam, and completed what we now recognize to be a sort of trilogy, with the sequels Dune Messiah in 1969 and the book Children of Dune in 1976. He had the notes written for years that could cover a trilogy, and now as a best-selling author, he could just keep the story and universe alive with some additions to the Dune series. The 4th book, God Emperor of Dune, was completed in 1981 and served as a bridge to a whole new trilogy. That's all I should probably say without going into any spoilers. Frank Hebert planned 3 more books after God Emperor to complete the series, but sadly passed away at the age of 65 before completing what he only referred to as Dune 7, the finale. Heretics of Dune, and the 6th and last book he would write in 85, just a year before his death, Chapter House Dune, would be the last entries. All through this legendary run of published work, Frank's wife was fighting a battle with cancer that would end up taking her life, just like how cancer complications took his. His wife played a vital role in writing these books as a writer herself, who helped with the whole process and editing. So his writing was slowed heavily over the years, helping care for his partner. It doesn't seem like he got to enjoy the fruits of his labor, dying before a true retirement. But he lived a truly full life, from all the articles and interviews of him I've watched to prep for this video. He's honestly one of the most interesting people, with views way ahead of his time concerning politics, religion, and the effects mankind is having on our planet. He comes off as one of those rare people that would excel in any disciplinary field. The Dune series was so successful because he poured a lifetime of experience from different areas into it with perfect balance. Every chapter in Frank's Dune series kicks off with a quote from one of its fictional characters or from a fictional book within the universe that usually has this deep weight to it, something philosophical that'll leave you thinking for a minute before continuing on to the chapter. These chapter interludes can vary from 1 line to half a page, and let me just give you an example. Any road followed precisely to its end leads precisely nowhere. Adds a lot of personality to his writing style and breaks up each section nicely. Between the 6-book Dune series, Frank signed off on some supplementary work, or companion books, to give readers a little more merchandise to get their hands on and help expand some of the world building and lore. In 1978, the illustrated Dune came out, which was the first book with some artwork to go along with the text. A nice piece for a book collection, and if you kept it in good condition, worth a decent amount of money. In 1984, a very interesting book called the Dune Encyclopedia came out, introducing a new author to put his name behind the Dune series. An established writer and friend of Frank Hebert, Dr. Willis McNally, put together the encyclopedia with Frank's approval. It fills in some huge blanks in this world's long history. I used this book to make my Dune timeline video a while back, though some of the more hardcore fans don't consider anything written in the encyclopedia to be canon, despite the foreword written by Frank in the first couple pages. But this sort of thing's always to be expected in a fandom. If it's not the original author's ideas, then some don't want to bother with it. In '84, a movie based on the first novel would be released, with some mixed reviews. But the movie came with some more supplementary books. The Making of Dune, with some interviews, and the Dune Storybook, with some on-set photography. Frank Herbert's last book ever published was not actually Chapter House Dune, because a few months later, he would put out a collection of short stories called I, with one of these short stories being relevant to the Dune universe called The Road to Dune, which serves as a kind of guidebook for characters within this fictional world when visiting the planet Dune. So some more world building. In '87, a book called The Maker of Dune was put out, which is a little strange. The description states it's filled with essays and other writing material handpicked by Frank himself before his passing. I obviously can't verify if this is true or not, but it would be pretty messed up to make up that he intended on putting out this easy cash grab, banking on the Dune name. Frank Hebert being gone didn't stop the Dune machine from printing, however, thanks to his son, Brian Herbert. Frank himself did put out a few supplementary work that I've mentioned outside the series because of Dune's success, but Brian takes it to another level. I would call it exploitative with how he's handling his father's legacy. He's the reason why there's the overabundance of books no one asked for. The exact same year as his father's death, a new novel series outside the Dune series would be put out with Frank's name on it, but for the first time he had his son's name written there as well as a co-author. Then again in 1988 with the notebooks of Frank Herbert's Dune. The title of the book here is very misleading, and I do not recommend picking this one up, even for collectors out there. It's literally just some random quotes from all of Frank's Dune series. Nothing unique and interesting about it, and the first sign of some abusive milking going on. Then Brian did what made me refuse to purchase anything attached to his name. With what seems like full control over the Dune franchise, Brian denied the Dune encyclopedia from ever having more printings made. He wanted to bury this lore book because it wasn't his vision, and maybe the profits weren't to his liking since it was written by another author. Remember, the encyclopedia had Frank's cosign while he was alive, unlike anything Brian put out. Brian would later try and contradict Dr. McNally's work with his own prequels. But first, before putting in any effort to try and do any creative writing, he would pump out some more lazy cash grabs. Songs of Muad'Dib in 1992 is a collection of poems Frank wrote for those beginning chapter interludes. Again, don't waste your money here, especially considering it's listed for over $1,000 on Amazon for some reason. 1992 isn't that old, scammers. Brian Herbert would later put out a biography of his father in 2003, calling it Dreamer of Dune, for that profitable name recognition. Brian's last supplementary addition to this catalog would be the worst thing he had ever published, in my opinion, in 2005. A book he would call The Road to Dune. It's like you forgot that Frank already named one of his short stories that. But that's not why I find this one in particular so distasteful. This book, if you can even call it that, is filled with Frank's unreleased work and some of his ideas for an alternate ending to Dune. These sort of things really tarnish the original creator's storytelling. If Frank Herbert worked so hard to keep us immersed and invested in a fictional world, why release notes that take us out of it? I don't think Brian is interested at all in his father's legacy or the impact of his work. I know he's tried going out and making a name for himself with some of his original novels with little success, but the book royalties from his father's work and that last name kicking off his own career should have been enough. Frank didn't make Dune at the start of his career. Very few can accomplish what he's done and define a genre. It's unfair to compare the two, father and son, I know, but Brian forces us to do so when plastering his name on new Dune books. But Brian kept on trying to contribute to this series, and I guess he noticed he didn't have the qualifications to start writing prequels and sequels, so he enlisted the help of another professional milker. Kevin J. Anderson, who has written for stuff like Star Wars and X-Files, is as qualified as you're gonna find. And with his help, 13 prequels have been made in the past 20 years, with more planned for the future. That's not all though. The duo, Brian and Kevin, would attempt to complete the 7th Dune book in Frank's series that he never got to complete because of his untimely passing. To milk it to the fullest, they made 2 final books instead, with what Brian wants us to believe are from lost notes found long after his father's passing. I mean, he could be very well telling the truth, but from what I've checked out, none of the prequels and sequels come close to capturing that same feel. I went through some of the graphic novels that adapt Brian and Kevin's prequels, because I felt it was necessary to compare the changes made to McNally's contributions in the Dune encyclopedia. He wanted it discontinued, right, for all his creative plans, but what I read was so generic and simple that it didn't even feel like Dune, no matter how many references made. Oh, and there's more. It is pretty impressive the rate they can publish new stories, because it's been almost annually since the 90s. I can't take that work ethic away from them. There's 10 short stories by Brian and Kevin, and the first 7 have been compiled into a new book that they could sell too, called Tales of Dune. So 44 books if you count Tales, but I wouldn't. And all those comics and graphic novels out there. Even Marvel Comics got their hands on this IP back in the day. I just view them as different versions of the same story, similar to special edition books or collector's editions. These 6 right here is all you need. If you fall in love with the series and you're bored enough to want to check out more, Frank Herbert has a handful of other novels with interesting ideas. Then if your internet and cable goes out, maybe then check out some of Brian's contributions. The Dune movie that'll be out in a few weeks will adapt only half of the first novel, which will help with the pacing because a lot goes down in the first book. The second movie will adapt the other half, and a third movie will adapt the shorter second book, giving us a nice trilogy to watch. As for the rest of the books, I wouldn't get your hopes up because they have never been adapted in the past, even with the short TV series. But if the renowned director can figure out a way to appropriately adapt a story with this much inner dialogue, the studio will happily fork up more money for sequels, even without Frank Herbert completing his story. Thanks for watching, guys.